Hi and welcome to Squiz.com, the connected marketplace. Today I'll be taking you on a journey through the changes we've made to the Squiz.com connector software in the 1.10 release, showing you all the amazing new things that it can do. If you didn't already know, the Squiz.com connector is a free piece of software developed by us that allows a business to connect any of their business systems, such as accounting systems, enterprise resource planning systems, customer relationship management systems, and any other systems, databases, or files storing data into the Squiz.com and TOTECS platforms. This in turn allows a business to trade effortlessly with other businesses on the platform in a highly integrated fashion. In simple terms, the connector allows businesses to save and make more money by being able to automate data transfer between its other supplier and customer systems. Now you've got a basic understanding of what the connector can do, let's look at the changes we've made to the 1.10 release. If I open up the connector application, a new tab that we've added to the connector is this tab called Datasets. And datasets introduce a new concept where we can view, store, and manage data within the connector application itself. Up until now, the connector has been a way to transfer data between different systems and files to other systems, but now we have the direct ability within the connector application to also manage and view data. So we're now introducing this new concept of a dataset. And a dataset is a file that stores a collection of different types of data. So we can create a new dataset within Connector by just clicking on the Create New Dataset. And then we've got an option where to save this new dataset file to. So I've got a folder on my computer where I can store some datasets. So let's just call it Test2. And it has the DB3 extension. So if you know that extension, that is an SQLite database extension. So a dataset is stored in an SQLite database. It's the same technology that is used to store data on mobile phones, as well as tablets and any other compact devices, among many things. So if we go into a dataset and click to view the dataset, that will bring up a new window where we can now see all the different kinds of data that can be stored in a dataset. So this is very similar to a spreadsheet application where we can now start putting in pieces of information in. So the first tab we have here is products. So this is where we can put in product data. So we can create new products by simply just entering data into any of these fields. So if I type in here, I can type in the word pink donuts. Now, once I then select any other cell, we can see now the internal ID column has now put the number 1 in it. So it's created a new record within the dataset database file, and now it's given it an ID of 1. So if we keep creating new rows by just putting in new data, we can now see that it will create an additional ID. So each record has its own internal ID within the database, and now we can go through all the different columns and put in extra information about these products. So we're talking about donuts. So we could add a description, give it pink donut with sprinkles on top. So we're a company that sells or buys pink donuts with sprinkles on top. So we've got all the fields that are available within the e-commerce standards documents, as well as the Squiz.com platform can be now set here. So we can set stock quantities for how many of these products are in stock. So we could put a number of 10. We could also put in units, so we sell them as each. We could put in information about who the supplier they were coming from is, so we could put in Donut Factory. We could put in other information such as tax information about how the tax is applied against this product. We can put in dimensions about the product, so it could be 5 centimeters in width, could be 1 centimeter in height, and a depth could also be 5 centimeters. And it could weigh 0.5 of a kilo. So we've got all these fields that are available, and we can find all the information about these fields in the standards documentation. Now, there's other aspects to this. We have fields that denote whether or not this product data is active, whether or not these products, we're working on this data and it can be considered to be able to be used in other areas. So that's what these two is, active and updated, and we'll go back in later and show how these fields can be used. We've also got dates, so we can see when we first created these records within the data set and the last time we modified that. So as soon as I change a value, you can see that the modified date value will change. And the final column we've got is a notes column. So if as we're working on data, we can put in any information. We may say that still need to update description fields. So this can help people who are managing data to be able to advise them of what's going on within this dataset file. So we have an example here where we have created 2 products, and we can also copy data from spreadsheet applications. So I've got more information about these products in my spreadsheet application, so we can copy these pieces of information across, just as you would in a spreadsheet application, selecting the cells, and then if we click the Control V characters, we can also paste that data into this data set. So we can copy and paste data from spreadsheet files across into our data set, which is very handy for when you're dealing with large sets of files. Now for this product data, we may not need this product data information, so we can select the rows, and let's just create a few more rows here. We can then, if we wanted then to delete these rows, if we click on the first row and hold down the Shift key and then select the last row, for all the rows are selected, if we click the delete rows, that will then ask you if you want to remove those records, and if we click yes, they're now deleted. So they're no longer stored within the data set. Now another aspect you can do in data sets, so if we create another few records, we can also copy values from one cell into multiple selected cells. So if I want the name Pink Donut to go across all of these other product records, I just select that, press the Control C keys together, and then select the cells that I want to paste that data into, and then click the Control V keys. Then that will paste that value into those cells. So once again, it's the same as spreadsheet applications where you can copy one value across into many cells. So if we select multiple cells and then we select one cell, then it will paste those values across from the position of the selected cell further downward. So we can then do the same by selecting, say, the second product record down. We can then paste those cells in. And if it's in a new row, then once we've modified that row, you can see it will create a new record for us as well. So this shows you how you can manipulate data and manage data within the data set where we're looking at product data here. So besides product data, where we can set up names, descriptions, and any additional information, if we go into the categories tab, we can now set up categories. So categories represents groups or a collection of products, and then we categorize them under a roof. So we're talking about donuts here, so we can create a new category called donuts. So once we select the cell, we can see that we've now once again got a new ID for that record, and then we can go through and give it meaningful codes, and then a unique ID for that category. So any columns that start off with a key that denotes that column is either a unique identifier of that record. So under products, we had key product ID, so they should be all unique. And same for categories, we have key category ID, so they should be unique. But there's also other columns that could be then reference another entity. So we have the key cell unit ID against the product. So that means that there's going to be cell units that also contain that same unique identifier that then links a product to then a cell unit. So that's how the key columns work, where in database terminology, they're either unique primary keys or they are foreign keys, we would call them, that link to other records in other areas. So if we go back to our categories, so we could come up with a few more different categories. So we might put a second one. Now these IDs don't need to be numeric. They could also be alphabetic, and we could use the keyword for donuts as the key category ID. We'll just keep it at 1 and 2 for now. So that way, if we change the code, that won't affect any other systems that this data may be linked to. So another category besides donuts, we could be selling coffee, could be a category. And then we can give that a name as well. So just like the products, we have a whole number of fields that are available that you can set for each category. And a lot of business systems don't go into this kind of level of detail where you can put in a lot of information about each category. So just like the products, we have the is active and is updated columns. We also have the created date and last modified date, so you can see when these records are being generated. And then you got another column where you can store notes against this. And for each of these fields, you can then put in the required information that you want to as you go. Just like the products, you can copy and paste these data around. You can select multiple. You can also delete rows by selecting the row, one or more rows, and clicking on the delete rows button. And then you just need to confirm that you're willing to do that. For categories, we have another sub-tab called category products. So this is where we can assign categories to products. So if we go back to here, we'll give our products some better codes. So if I pull up my spreadsheet, we'll just copy these codes back and we'll paste them back into here. Now, if we go back into the category products and click the reload data, you can now see those product codes that are available here. So this table is a bit different where it's getting the data out of the products tab, and then it's displaying those records within this table as well. So our objective here is to assign these products to one or more categories. So since these are all donut categories, we need to get the key unique ID of those categories, and we might give them a code just to make it easier to understand. And then we assign those products to the category that we want. So these pink, blue, purple, and yellow donut products are now all assigned to the donut category. Now we may have multiple categories that products need to be assigned to. So let's create another category. It could be called baked goods. And we'll just use the code for the key category ID here as well. So we can now assign these products to the baked goods category as well. If we're navigating on a website, the user may be able to find these different kind of donut products by either going to the donuts category or going to the baked goods category. Now these themselves, the categories, they can be referenced from one to the other. So baked goods may be a broader category than donuts. So that means the donuts category, its parent would be the baked goods category. So we set the baked goods category to be in this key category parent ID field. So when the user goes to a website, they may first see the baked goods category. Then from there, they then can navigate to the donuts category, and then they can find the products all based that are listed here. So that's a typical structure that you'll see in most websites about how helping users to find products based on navigating through a category tree. And that's what we can set up here. Now, note that the user would also be able to see the donuts in the baked goods category as well as if the user went further down into the donuts category. So there's more chance of a user being able to find those products. Now, there's up to 5 different categories that you can assign a product to. If you import category data from other systems into the dataset, you can even have more columns again, and it'll be smart enough to add the columns that's necessary. Now, the other tab that we have in a dataset is called cell units. So cell units denote how they can be bundled into quantities and different sets of quantities on how a product can be sold. So if we think of the most typical cell unit that exists in most systems is each cell unit. So we could give that an ID of EA, and we'll give it a code of each, and we'll give it a label of each as well. So each denotes that a product can be bought in an individual quantity. Whereas for some products, you may want to bundle them into packs. So we could create a new cell unit called pack. We can give the code and label the label pack as well. And then some products could be bought in containers. So we could have a container load of some kind of product being purchased. So we can see we're defining the different kinds of ways product quantities can be bundled together. Now you can create as many of these different cell units as you want. So besides that, you could have cartons, pallets, you could have a shipload if you wanted to. You could also have linear meters if you're talking about things that can be bought in different measurements. So we can also do that as well. This introduces the concepts of cell units, and then the next part of cell units is, if we go into the product cell unit tab, is to assign cell units to products to denote what a product can be bought in. If we think of our pink donut, we could buy that in individual units, so we might assign that to there. We might also want to assign that to a pack, so you can buy a pack of donuts. So in this case, we need to put in the unique key ID of that product, that donut product, and the system will then find that based on the data in the product tab. And then we need to set the ID of the pack that can be then also purchased for that pink donut. So pink donut can be now bought in individual units each. They can also be bought as a pack. And then we could also buy them as a carton. So we could then assign the pink donut to a carton. So now we have, if we reload this, we can see that a pink donut is bought in a pack, a carton, and each. Now there's some other fields that are available here for each of these units that are being assigned to a product. So one of them is which unit is the base unit. So a base unit denotes the individual quantities of that product that can be ordered. So we can buy individual quantities of a pink donut, which was each, so that becomes the base unit, but we can buy multiple individual units in the carton format as well as the pack format. So they're not the base unit. The base unit is the individual unit that can be purchased. And now we can give them a different label. Maybe you don't buy a carton of donuts. Maybe you buy them as a carton of 6. So we can give each unit an individual label for that product. and then that can display on the web as opposed to just having the word carton or pack. Now, the other fields that we've got available is to be able to set the base quantity. So if each is the base unit, then we can say how much of a carton of donuts is made up of individual products. In this case, we're talking about a carton of 6, so there could be 6 individual donuts that make up one carton. Whereas for a pack, there could be 3 donuts that make up a pack. So that's what this base quantity field is all about. Now, the parent quantity is if we have a relationship between different units. We have this unit here called key cell unit parent ID. So we can say that there are 2 packs that make up one carton, and there are 3 donuts that make up one pack. So we've got relationships between packs and cartons, eaches and packs, and so we can set this up. So the parent ID of the carton could be the pack, so we can copy that there, and then we can say that there are 2 packs that will make up one carton. And just like how we have for the cartons, we can do the same for the packs, where there are 3 each individual units that make up a pack. So then we assign the each key cell unit ID as the parent ID of the pack. So that allows the Squiz.com platform to be able to see the relationship, so that way users can then switch between how they can purchase a quantity or a package of these products together, and they can change that within the Squiz.com platform itself. Just like all the other different data sets, we have fields for is updated, is active, created, date time, last modified, and a column for notes as well. Now, back in the cell units, there's also those same fields which are available, and they can be used for when there's no data set up for each of the individual products. So typically you're going to set up the relationships between each of these different cell units, and then you can give them generic labels, and then after that, put in more information if you wish for each product. So that way, the Squiz.com platform, it can make broad decisions as well as specific decisions are based on what units a product is being sold as. So that gives you the 3 different types of data you can set up in a data set within the connector. So we've got products, we've got categories, we've got cell units, and for categories, we can assign products to categories. For cell units, we can assign cell units to products. So those are the relationships that we've all got available in the data set so far. And in the future, we will be looking to add more different types of data types where you can set up this information. Now also note that there is this 4th set is the dataset properties tab. So this shows you information about the dataset itself. So each dataset that's imported into the connector gets a unique identifier. Each dataset also has a version. So as the connector version changes, the datasets and more functionalities need to be added to datasets. The dataset version will change as well. And this makes sure that the connector knows when it has to update datasets as the connector gets upgraded. Each dataset has a name, and the name is based on the file name of that dataset, which is stored on the file system, as we can see there. Now, the general notes is another field that's available where you can throw in any information about this dataset as you wish, such as you might want to put in information to other people, such as the product data is still being worked on by Lee. So you can throw in any information you want, which may help others to understand why this dataset exists, what kind of data is being managed within it, if there's any issues or things that need to be resolved within it. So now we've got the concept of datasets, so you can create multiple datasets within the connector. So and we just simply create a new data set, give it a new name, and then away we go. So we'll call this one test 3. You can have an unlimited amount of data sets that you can create. So you might have a data set which is set up for one company that you manage, and then you may have another company that's related that you also set up data for. Or maybe you have subdivisions or departments within your organization, and they may manage just one aspect of data. However you want to play with it, you've got all this flexibility on how the data can be stored in these data sets. You can also copy data sets from one connector application stored on one computer to another. And all it is simply copying and pasting these files across and sending them across to the other connector instance. And once you've copied the file to another computer, we can add an existing data set into the connector application by just clicking the Add Existing button. Then we can find our data set. So I've got this one here called Test1. If I just choose to open that, The connector will first verify that the dataset has the correct format and has the correct settings, and if it all is good, the connector will add it to the list here where we can then go through and view it. In this case, there's no data set up in that dataset at this stage. Now, if you want to remove a dataset from the connector, you can do that by just clicking the remove button. And note that this will not delete the dataset from the file system, it will only remove it from the connector. So there's no chance of this dataset magically disappearing. If we click the remove button, it simply just removes it from the connector. And if we ever have to add it back in again, we just find that same file and it's back within the connector. So the only way to delete datasets from a computer is you would have to go in and remove it physically from the file system. So the way we would do that is we would have to go in and open up a Windows Explorer, find the file, click the delete icon, and you'd have to be really certain that you want that file to disappear. And it's also recommended to back up these files, especially if they're storing thousands or tens of thousands of records. Then it's a very good idea to have a backup strategy in place. You may want to then synchronize this data to be stored through the myriad of different online storage devices such as Dropbox or OneDrive or whatever you can find out there, and to guarantee that you're not going to lose this precious data which may be stored within these data sets. Now, what we can also do is we can import data into these data sets. And this is really relevant if you've already got products data or some category data all already coming out of an existing business system, which is typically the case since that's where you're going to typically create products or remove products and manage products from. So if we have in our adapters and messages tab, if we have set up a connection to the business system where the product data is coming from, or it could be a connection to a database or a data file or a spreadsheet file, then we can then query and get that data out of that file or system, and then we can import it into the data set that we choose. So I've got one adapter set up for the Quickie Mart organization that we've been using as our example in previous release videos. I've configured the generic adapter here in order to have the ability to read from a CSV spreadsheet file. So here's an example of the spreadsheet file that we have here. So it's already got 3 products stored within it. Now, I've configured it to read from this file. So I've set up a CSV data source that's going to read from any files within this directory in our file system. And then if we go to the data exports and we select from the products data export, it's going to read from this product CSV file, and I've assigned the different fields that are available in this file to the fields that are available in the connectors standards. Now, once that's been done, we can now export data from the CSV file and put it into the data set itself. So if we go into exports and routines for that adapter, once we select the products data export, there's now a third option for the systems that we want to export this data to. So we want to get it into a connected data set. So once we've selected that in the drop down here, we can now select our data set. So we might want to put it into our test2 data set. And then once we've done that, if we click the run once off button, that can retrieve the data out of the CSV file and it will import it to our data set. So if we open up the data set again, because this window was already open, we need to just simply reload the data. We can now see that the data had changed, and the first 2 products, the description of those products had now been altered, since it's now getting the descriptions from that CSV file instead. Now, when it does that exporting feature, it's doing a merging feature. So it's able to find if any products have the same key product ID coming from the CSV file as what is matched within this data set here. And because it's been able to find that, it's been then able to update the fields that have been made available from our configured adapter. So it's overwritten the product information within all these different fields. And so you can see it has also additionally added more information such as barcodes, brands, additional information about the units. So we can see that we've imported a number of pieces of information into the existing datasets. Now, if the records didn't exist, it would have also added new records to the dataset as well. We may not want all the information about the products to be overwritten within our data set. So we then need to pick and choose which pieces of information should get overwritten and which pieces shouldn't. So if I change these description, we'll just put the numbers 1 and 2 here. We don't want that data to change, and we'll do the same for the name here. When we run a data export again, so if we go into that adapter again, back within the data exports tab, once we find the products export, In the data fields, we do not want it to overwrite the first description field, so we can turn that description field off. Once we turn that off, we click the reload data button to tell the connector software to update itself, and we close that. Next time we do run a data export, we choose the connect data set, we'll put it into test set number 2 and run the once off to export the data from our CSV file and import it into the data set again. So once that's loaded, we open up the data set again. So we already got the window that's open here. We click the reload button. We can see that the name of those products had changed, but the data within the description field was no longer changed, which is perfect because that means that we can change all descriptions within the data set here, whereas the rest of the data can come from our CSV file and then update the data there. Now, for most businesses, they would be modifying potentially the names within their own business systems or ERP and accounting systems, whereas they may not have a first or the third or description field, so all this additional information. So we can pick and choose which columns we want to, where the data does not change for products, and then other columns where we do want to consistently keep it updated. And an example might be with the stock quantities. We may want to get a stock quantity about these products coming out from a different system, and so that can continually change as we modify these data sets, whereas the names and descriptions, we may not want to manage it in another system. We just may want to manage it within the data set. So all that flexibility is available. We're just going to decide which fields we want to manage within this data set and which fields we want to manage through other different systems. Now, as a part of that process, when we imported the data from the spreadsheet file, we can see that the is updated column has changed. So we can see the records that were matched upon and had data updated within them, and the records did not. That's what the is updated flag. So every time we do run that data export, this field will change when it cannot match any products that already exist in the data set. So we can see these 4 records do not exist in our CSV file. That itself may not be an issue, and then we don't really care about it. But this is once again another status that we can see of the kind of data that is being updated and the data that is not. Now, the other field that we have available here is the is active flag. So we may only care about product data that is proactively being imported from another system. So if we run another data export, go back to here. Now, in this time, when we run a products data export, we want to mark products as being inactive if the record isn't being returned from the data source that we're getting it from. So for this scenario, if we click the connector data set, and this time we change the data transfer mode from incremental to full, that means that it's going to try to import the full data set from the CSV file, and if a record is not found within the data set, then it's going to mark it as being inactive or is active equals N. So we run that again. Once that has been finished running, we open up the inventory data set, we do a reload, and now we can see that all those records have been marked as inactive. All these products are now inactive. If we were exporting data out of the data set, then we could tell it to only get the active records, which would be these 3 rows here. So this allows us to know which product data should we still keep maintaining and which data do we no longer care about based on the data being pulled out of different systems. Now, the other aspect to exporting data out, so we're running these exports once off in a manual fashion, but we may want to decide to export the data from a different system into a data set at a regular time interval. So all we need to do is, once again, choose our data export, choose the connector, choose the option that we want to go to if we want to make records being inactive or not. So we would say, yes, we're getting it out from a data set. We want to do that. Here's the data set we want to import the data into, and then we now click the add to schedule so that we can choose how often should data go from the CSV file into our data set, our test2 data set here. So we could set it up for 1 day or 1 minute or 1 hour that the connector will automatically do this exporting importing feature. And then we've got a whole bunch of options that we've got available here. Once again, you can choose your data sets, and then we can add it to a schedule. So then the connector will run this at the time set here, and it will run it continuously in the frequency given. So tomorrow at the same time, this will run a data export, as well as the day after that, and every single day until the connector service isn't running. So that gives a lot of flexibility to make sure that data is continually being synchronized back to the data sets, which could be relevant for if data is being modified in external systems. So that gives you a good idea of how datasets can work within the connector and how you can pull data into the datasets and then manipulate the data and manage the data from there. Now, the other aspect of that is when we want to export data out of the datasets and get them into other places, such as the Squiz.com platform. Now, we can do that as well with the next new feature we've added to the connector, is within the generic adapters. We have added a new data source type from where we can query data out of. So we've got this thing called the SQLite Database as another data source type. So we're going to allow this adapter to query data from these SQLite databases. So we can give the data source type a name. So I'll give it the same name as our dataset that we want to get data out. So we call it test2 dataset, and we'll add that as a data source. And then within this window, we can choose the SQLite database file where we want to query from. So if we go into there, we'll find our test dataset, our test2 dataset. We can test running if we can connect to that dataset by just putting an SQL database query. So it has successfully connected to that database file. And then we've got a few settings here, such as if we were writing data to the database file, we can choose whether or not to write as transactions. That means do many writes all in one hit. And if that doesn't succeed, then to roll back all the changes, which is generally the recommended option. And if we're writing to the data, we could use prepared statements, which is typically a safe way to write data to a data set as well. So once those options have been selected, we click the Save button. Now in our data exports, we can choose now to export data out of our data set. So if we go down and find the products data exports, currently it's going to be reading data from a CSV file. We can change this now to read from our dataset file. And then we've got options on how we want to do that. So we're going to find the table in the dataset database, and the table is called products, that contains the product information. If we wanted to do any joins to any other data tables that exist, then we can do them there. And then we can find the fields that exist within the dataset that we want to export out. Now, I made all the fields the same name to make this nice and easy. But once we've done that, then we can test our query to query data out of the dataset with this test export query. And if we run it, we can see that it has been the query browser, the SQLite query browser, which is another new feature we've added to the connector, can now query out the data within these files. So we can see the same information that was coming out of our dataset that is happening here. And if we bring up the dataset itself, if we make changes to it, such as we'll change the code to donut yellow 2, go back to the query browser, we can now see that that change has been made in the query browser. So we can test and verify that we are changing the same kind of data from the dataset. And now all it's left to do, because now we're going to be reading data from the dataset's database itself, we can now then export the data out of that dataset by simply choosing the products data export once again, and then choosing to export that to the relevant system, such as the Squiz platform. And then we can run that once off, and it will import all that product data out of the dataset and into the Squiz.com platform. So with this new SQLite database, we can read data from any kind of table stored within the database for SQLite databases stored as version 3. So if we wanted to, we could get the SQLite database from a mobile phone, such as using the Android system. We could plonk it on our computer, then we could start querying the data out of it. And we can also access the query browser also from the tools menu within the connector application and click on the SQLite Database Query Browser. So if we find the dataset file, we can choose, so maybe we want to get stuff out of and query the data out of test 1. All we need to do is then to write a database query using SQL query language and then see what's within the file. So let's just see what's within this category table. So the tables that are stored within a dataset, there are a table called product, a table called category, a table called category product that stores the mappings between products and categories. There's a table called cell unit, and then there's another table called product cell unit. So you can use any of these tables to then query and export data. And then we can also join data. So maybe we've got some information about categories within a category table, but when we export the product data, we want to put the category that it's assigned to in the category name within the description to field. So that is all possible using the SQLite data source type within the generic adapter. So you can get pretty crazy on what the kind of stuff you can do, as well as you can set up adapters that can then pull data from one data set and push it into another data set using the examples that were seen before. So you can link data sets to other data sets and filter data coming in and out of those data sets. It's extremely powerful in what you can do with these data sets and these data source types. So that gives you a great example of the dataset functionality that is available in the Connector application. Have a play with it and see if you can come up with some great ways of automating and making it easy to manage different kinds of business data within the Connector application itself, and which you can install on any Windows-based computers that have the .NET framework installed on it as well. Now you can find more information about setting up datasets within the Connector if you go to the squiz.com/docs/connector URL. And then if you scroll down to datasets, you can find more information about how to set up and manage datasets. There's quite a few pieces of information available there, as well as instructions on how you can then get going with datasets within the Connector application and the fields that are available within the datasets themselves and what they store and the data they represent. Additionally, within the documentation, there's documentation on how to use the SQLite Database Query Browser, which you can query any SQLite databases with, and the steps you need in order to be able to use that query browser. And if you have any more questions or comments or information that you need to find out about this, you can always go to the squiz.com profile if you're registered in the platform, and then post a question or comment within our Squiz Early Adopters feed, and we're happy to answer your questions there. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Until the next time, have fun with the Connector.